Innovation to me is about it's a new and better way to solve a defined problem. If you are solving the old problem, you're probably going to get disrupted. If you recognize that, hey, disruption is now redefined a new problem that you have to solve, that's opportunity. It could also be taking the same problem and solving it in a new, kind of a more effective way.
I'm Dave, and I'm here with another Dave. Really excited, looking forward to this one. We're going to talk about how better ways of working help with creating disruption in a market or in an industry. So that's coming up next on Better Ways of Working. Welcome, everybody. But before we get started, I do want to give a little bit of disclaimer. Today's guest I've actually worked with before, so I want to say this up front. The views and the stories we are going to share are our own. We're not representing any current or past employers. We're just two guys reflecting on lessons from our careers. So I want to introduce you to Dave Stagney, somebody I've had the privilege to work with, and I'm really excited that we get to collaborate in this project. So Dave, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Dave. It's great to see you again. I've been in aerospace about 20 years here with a little bit of a detour in the financial industry.
What were some pivotal moments that really shaped your leadership approach involving disruption?
For me, when I was in grad school for operations, I had two guest lecturer professors that came in that really kind of shaped a lot of my thinking. The first one was Michael Hammer. He was the father of what they call process reengineering. The most famous example of reengineering is Progressive Insurance. They pretty much redesigned the way that auto insurance claims were done. And the key concept was really this idea of rearranging the order that you do things. So fundamentally kind of questioning from an auto insurance claim, why do you have to wait until after the customer has gotten in an accident, right? After they don't have a car, they don't know what's going to happen, and their life is really kind of upended. All those things take a long time while the customer is really in a very difficult situation. And Michael Hammer said, well, it turns out we can actually do all of those things ahead of time. We're going to do all that work ahead of time. And the goal would be to drive out to the customer and give them a check within 1 hour. It's totally disruptive from a kind of a competitive standpoint. Another one that really stuck out for me was Clayton Christensen. And he's the author of the book called The Innovator's Dilemma. And the main example that he gives is in the disk drive industry, which is a little outdated now with all the technology that we use now. So you think about, in early days, big, gigantic mainframe computers, they were trying to store more and more and more data on these gargantuous, room-sized computers. Well, along comes Steve Jobs and, there's a desktop computer. Well, now, you don't need this, gigantic, huge magnetic drive that's in a room. It's a different problem that you're trying to solve. And the new disruptors come in and completely put them out of business.
So let's talk a little bit more about the word disrupt or disruption. So how would you define it?
Yeah, it's certainly a good buzzword.
Yeah.
that I use a lot. I actually think about that there's kind of three terms that people use kind of interchangeably, and it's probably good to kind of, differentiate between them. First, you have disruption, right? You have innovation, and you have transformation. Which we use a lot. So I think they're kind of different forces. Disruption to me is what we were just talking about with the disk drive. It's a shift in the entire system, right? The rules of the game actually change. You have new technologies, you have new demands from different customers, you have maybe regulatory changes, have, cost pressures, something globally is happening that change your old assumptions that you're operating, and those become obsolete, right? Your customers have actually redefined what is valuable to them. And it usually kind of comes from outside, and it forces you to change internally. To me, then disruption kind of triggers a change in your strategy, right? And if you don't change your strategy, then you can go out of business.
Mm-hmm.
But it then triggers you internally to innovate. right? Innovation to me is about it's a new and better way to solve a defined problem. If you are solving the old problem, you're probably going to get disrupted. If you recognize that, hey, disruption is now redefined a new problem that you have to solve, that's opportunity. It could also be taking the same problem and solving it in a new, kind of a more effective way. You know now what the rules are, and you can apply a different set of, ways to solve that problem. It's kind of really intentional. Oftentimes you're innovating it. So again, disruption kind of creates that external pressure. It creates the urgency for you to do something different. You then have to set a different goal. So the rules have changed. You got to figure out what you need to do. And you got to define your problem. You got to understand the assumptions that are holding you back. And then you can
Hmm.
innovate when you kind of break free of some of those old assumptions and focus on the new problem. And the last one I mentioned is transformation. That then is kind of the process of implementing the innovation, right? Or implementing the change, the response to the disruption. It could be your strategy, your organization, your culture, your product, your technology. Kind of all those have to align together in order to be successful.
And there's change management and adoption. And I think we could spiral on just on that one alone, right? How to get that to be successful, the transformation. Yeah.
Exactly.
So let's talk about some examples of true disruption from your career.
Yeah, the few of these are really interesting, and I'd love to kind of chat through them.
Hmm.
Again, this is the disruption to me is that, when the rules of the game are changing. I started working at Capital One. Um, and I was able to kind of bring my operation skills over to a different industry. I really wanted to learn digital. I wanted to learn agile, and finance as well. So every year, Rich Fairbanks, who is the CEO, he's the founder of Capital One, has this huge strategy meeting where he brings everyone together. And it was perfect because I had just started a lot of new regulations, a lot of changes in the financial industry. And Rich was really good at kind of thinking ahead about the industry and where things were going. And he recognized at the time that big banks, credit card companies at the time, were making a really large percent of their profit on the late fees and interest charges. And he's walking us through this, and he says, I just don't think that's the right thing to do from a reputation standpoint, from a business model standpoint. I don't think the regulators are going to like this going forward, and I just don't think it's the right thing to do. And in the meeting, he challenged the entire company to kind of disrupt their business model. I think we should challenge that assumption that that's the only way that we're going to make our money going forward. And I don't want to wait around until someone tells us that we have to change. I want you all to go and figure out a different way to operate the company. And so that was the disruptive push that he gave. And then he challenged the company to kind of innovate and come up with different solutions about how to, change that business model. So again, to me, it's that really the disruption came from changing the kind of mental model, or call it paradigm, that you're operating under, right? What are those key assumptions, nobody talks about, right? That's a very different problem that you're trying to, and by the way, make money while we do that, right? Right. But if that's a fundamentally different problem that you're trying to solve, that's going to completely change, everything that people do at work during the day. And like I mentioned, it's just the we call it group think or whatever, the assumptions that you have. You don't even realize it, but there are a certain unwritten set of rules.
So let's dig into the process a little bit here. Walk through of a product life cycle you've experienced that's led to disruption or involves the disruption process we've been talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Let's we can go into an example that you and I both lived through. In aerospace. We were at Pratt Whitney and launched the GataWorks organization. Obviously we can't go into a lot of specific details here.
Go see the disclaimer at the beginning of the video.
There's lots of articles publicly written about
Yes, there's
this,
public
and
articles that we'll be
uh,
referring to.
you and I can kind of tell our side of the story here, but I think it's a great example. And this started, I think about it's like maybe 2018, 2017. The company, Pratt Whitney, makes jet engines. A fantastic, amazing company. Just had a 100th anniversary.
Yes, it's a 100th year. It's a great company.
Amazing
To another
people.
100 years.
And around that time, the company got a lot of feedback that its technology and product development processes were just too slow and too expensive. The ultimate outcome of those processes are fantastic. The F-135 engine, it's a main engine for the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, right?
The F.
Yes, the one and only. I think when they launched it, at the time, it had like 14 times better safety record than the previous generation of engines. I mean, really, really amazing, right? So the technology development, the product development process wasn't broken, right? It did exactly what it wanted, but there was this disruption going on in the aerospace industry, certainly in the defense area. you know, Customers, the Department of War and others, that's a different problem to solve. Sometimes you need to do that, and sometimes you need to do something very different. So at the time, Matthew Bromberg, he was the president of Pratt Military Engines, and he came down and he challenged us. I don't know if you remember, if you were there, but he said, guys, I need you to cut the cost and lead time by 50%, right? This wasn't going to be your traditional Lean Six Sigma project, right? It wasn't going to get us where we needed. We needed to kind of fundamentally challenge the status quo. And what were those rules of the game that were defining that kind of long cost structure? Really kind of rethink all of that. And that was something I know that the team absolutely reveled in. We kind of started with two things. We said, first of all, like, what's the actual problem we were trying to solve? Right? Are we, from back to the kind of the innovator's dilemma, are we just going to continue to produce bigger, more powerful, more, fuel efficient engines? Or is there maybe something different that the customer wants and needs to solve their problem? And again, secondly, what are the key assumptions? What are the rules of the game that we're kind of living by? The customer came to us and they said, they wanted us to design a fan for them. The fan is kind of the first stage on a jet engine. It kind of produces the majority of the thrust. What's kind of possible, and kind of the typical way we would approach that is, we would want to list out all the requirements, right? We'd want to make a huge program, and we'd want to do a massive amount of analysis to figure that all out, right? So that you don't fail the test, because you're going to put a lot of time and effort into the test. So the first thing we did is we said, well, let's just, we already have a model. We kind of think we know what it is. Well, let's just use the first sprint to basically print the fan and test it, and then we'll use that data to calibrate the model, right? And that's a very different outcome, right? The goal of the first sprint is not to test your prototype. Iterative design is something that a lot of companies do, right? And it's been done for a long time. But when you think about, well, again, what's the problem that we're actually trying to solve? We want to know if our models actually are accurate and can allow us then to design and build the right product going forward. So that was the first thing. So we built it, we tested it. Of course, it didn't work. Well, maybe it worked, but it wasn't that great. But we brought the customer in. The customer's standing there and they're looking at it and they say, you know what? Actually, now that I see it, I want it to look like this. And it completely changed the design.
That is the collaboration, and I'll know when I see it effect, right?
Yeah, it was phenomenal, right?
And that's because there was the time and the space for learning and learning from the learning and incorporating that in the feedback, right? This has been great, Dave. It's great to see you. Thank you for coming on. We'll may have to continue this discussion. If folks want to get a hold of you, what's your preferred method?
You could just look me up on LinkedIn. I'd love
Okay.
to hear from you.
Folks, thanks for joining us. Please comment, please like and subscribe. Always love to hear from our listeners and viewers. We're on all the podcast platforms and YouTube and Substacks. Thanks a lot and have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, Dave.